Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. He's Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network. And now, live from Austin, Texas, Alex Jones.
Well, a couple weeks ago, I scheduled to take off from the radio on this 1010 broadcast, this Thursday edition, so I could finish Obama Deception 2. But then I decided to not take off today to work on Obama Deception 2, so I am here live, but only for the first 30 minutes. And then I do have other duties that I need to take care of here in the Infowars.com operations, and David Knight will be here coming up at the bottom of the hour, and he's got a big whistleblower guest from inside the banking cartels coming on. We'll look at the persecution of whistleblowers that is accelerating and taking place. That is coming up with David Knight at the bottom of the hour. David Knight will also have another special guest joining him on the broadcast as well, and we're going to premiere some special reports here today, so it's going to be a jam-packed transmission. Obviously, we're into day 10 or 11 of the government shutdown, and things are getting very serious, and now we're seeing members of Congress, we're seeing New Republic magazine that's basically another arm of the White House, so they speak for the establishment, calling for basically martial law politically. Just do whatever they want. We never even played that clip of the Texas Congresswoman talking about that yesterday, but perhaps later in the broadcast we will play a clip of her, the Houston Democrat, breaking that down. So that's the type of thing we're dealing with here. And now Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former head of policy at the Department of Treasury, says Obama could use debt crisis to seize total power and bring in martial law with executive orders. And that's basically what Peter Schiff has been warning about as well. So this is a very serious situation that we are dealing with here. Also, we are going to be getting into the latest on the shutdown itself and the harassment of citizens that get anywhere near national parks. They're now arresting people that show up, not just pointing guns at them, but arresting people that show up at the Grand Canyon. Julie Wilson wrote about that last night for Infowars.com. It's gotten almost no other coverage that I've seen. Pretty shocking. Also, no one has been able to sign up for Obamacare through the exchanges except for one lady who spent multiple hours every day working with CNN to try to sign up, and then her deductible was $13,000, and it was double. I have the article here, double the cost that was previous. And still the Obama supporters are thankful, saying, now I'll be able to get health care, when it's going to wreck the already screwed up system because of special interest being involved the last 5 decades. So we're going to be breaking all of that down as well. But when we come back from break, I want to sum up for you the essence of what Obamacare really is and why it's not meant to actually work, why it's not meant to actually operate. And then we'll go over some of the other headlines that are up on Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. But there's a report out by Red State and other big sites. We don't know if it's accurate, but these are from pretty credible sites. And by credible, they usually report real news. Feds order National Guard to close I-495 to derail trucker protest. Well, I mean, that would do what the protest was supposed to do to begin with, shut things down. So Obama supporter arrested after aiming gun at female impeachment protesters. So that we've got that big article up on Infowars.com. Ex-Treasury official, Obama could use debt crisis to seize total control. Just mentioned that. Is Obama going to be our new Caesar? Dr. Paul Craig Roberts asked in that article. Warning, enrolling in Obamacare allows government to link your IP with your name. And, of course, Mike Adams, as usual, has figured out what it's really all about. We're going to be breaking that down on the other side as well. Stay with us. It is 10:10, ladies and gentlemen, Thursday, the 10th day of October, 2013. I'm your host, Alex Jones. We're live broadcasting worldwide until the bottom of the hour when David Knight will join you with a special breakdown, breaking news. You know, coming up, In about a week, there's going to be an armed open-carry march in San Antonio out front. The Alamo, the police chief, has said he will arrest anyone legally carrying firearms. This is how they harass people that have firearms in their garage, and the neighbor sees it, you go to jail because they claim that you're carrying a gun to alarm. No, it's legal to walk down the road with a hatchet if you're going to cut something, but if you brandish the hatchet and say, I'm going to kill you with it, that's what the law says, brandishing a weapon. Well, the Department of Defense has put out a report saying that there's a growing trend of soldiers assigned to Fort Hood openly carrying firearms in private businesses establishments, when they're off duty, and officers and live in their own house, in establishments in the greater local area in an attempt to publicly assert their Second Amendment rights. These events have led to several confrontations with civilian law enforcement personnel attempting to determine whether there was any threat to the public safety. Texas law makes it illegal to display a firearm in a public place in a manner calculated to alarm. And that's how they arrest people every day nationwide. We're putting a deer rifle on the back of their car to go shooting. The neighbor doesn't like it, you get SWAT teamed, a lot of times killed. This is their reign of terror against gun owners. When legal gun owners frustrate crime 49 times, the new Justice Department numbers, used to be 20-something, 49 times for every time a gun is used in the commission of a crime. Look it up. Funny, it's 49 times because it's also 49% in overall crimes using guns since 1992 Justice Department numbers. That's coming up bottom of the hour. David Knight, and he's got a bunch of other big special reports. We interviewed the Texas Land Commissioner who's backing open carry marches on the Alamo. In fact, word is he may be down there for it. So that Jerry Patterson interview is coming up that they did down at the Capitol with him. We're going to premiere that here on the radio coming up today, and a lot more. There's also a big whistleblower coming up. I wasn't going to come in today. I was going to work on other things here around the office, but I'm here because the news is just so important. Wild horses couldn't drag me away from the fight here. And so I want to, in a nutshell, tell you from deep research, and this will all now come out, from deep research, what Obamacare really is, in a nutshell. It is a giant tax, and of course, I've been telling you that for 5 years. It's been law for 3, but implements this year. The Supreme Court has said it's a tax. It is a tax, but it's a private levy, a ransom to the IMF and World Bank and Federal Reserve, all heads of the same mega 6-bank cartel that's waging war against all the other insurance companies and banks, the free market, your family, national government, state governments. It is a total economic warfare system, in their own words. The goal is impoverish you, take over your society, bankrupt you, sign you onto debts that are impossible to pay back, wreck the country into debt that's all fiat, and so they get the world. It's financial conquering. We all know that. But Obamacare was written, 10,000 plus pages of writers, 3,000-page bill by the big 10 insurance companies on record, predominantly controlled by the big 6. Really, it's the big 5 mega banks, but they say 6. Now it's about 5 because one's merged. These conglomerates. And they want to have the NSA total spying legalized. It does that. Spying on everyone, getting all your personal data, sharing it with whoever they want. They want government running your health care to carry out eugenics and lower standard of care. And they want to be able to double the prices at least and then give that money to the banks as a tax. Then the government wants a cut, though. And by not allowing the exchanges to work, and Mike Adams is a top programmer. He said this 2 days ago, scanning the system, put a big article out at naturalnews.com. We had it at Infowars.com. It's now in the news today, Washington Post. Top programmers are saying, gee, there's nothing there. It's a facade. Boy, they really screwed up. No. They didn't screw up just like with Amber Alert. The whole site's there. They just put a block up front. They are wrecking the system on purpose. And then all their constituents want the freebie, even after they get their tax returns, their tax refunds get confiscated, even as the middle class has the garnishment out of their bank accounts. That's what the law says. They've hired 17,000 agents to do it. Even as all that happens, the gullible slaves will still say, gimme, gimme, gimme. Republicans did it. And we'll go into the next phase of the major screw job. And I've talked a lot about the Nigerian email scam that's been around since 1995 because everybody knows about it. There's many scams, but that's a well-known one, where, you know, they say, we need $5,000 in Prince of Booby. We'll send you 10, 15 million. And then you give Prince of Booby $5,000. He says, well, the prince needs 10,000 more now, but you'll get to talk to him on the phone to be able to wire the money out of the account. You know, his uncle has held him hostage. And then the person goes, oh, I want my 10 or 15 million. Here's 10,000 more. And usually once they get you to give the first 5,000, in some cases they get 100, 200, 300 thou. People sell their houses and wire the money to Nigeria. It's a government-run scam. They allow it. And they make hundreds of millions a year still off of it on record because people can't believe they've been conned. So they just keep sticking money in like a degenerate gambler at the casino mortgaging his house. The deeper they get in the hole, the more they're going to get into it. It's the lottery ticket mentality. If you buy a lottery ticket for fun, that's another issue. But people really think this is going to save my life. It's false hope. Instead of inventing something or getting another job or becoming a criminal. I mean, it's better than being a sucker. Just don't prey on innocent people. Prey on the system. More and more, I think Robin Hood's the way to go. I just said it. I'm sorry. I don't do criminal stuff myself. But, I mean, in the world of criminals, you got to survive. As long as it's against the criminal enemy, whatever. The point is, there's nothing stupider than being suckers. And they're going to take them all to the bank. And they're now, just like Sibelius said on Monday on Jon Stewart's show, she said, well, you know, since it doesn't work, we're just going to fine you $5,000. And that's always been the plan. Poor people are just not going to get their refund. You're not going to get your $300 to $1,000. It's gone. And then everybody else, it doesn't matter. They're going to fine and fee you the way it's written if you don't get the type of insurance they want. It's all over, folks. This is a American killing machine. And I already knew that, but I'm surprised at how bold it is. I've got to be honest with you. I mean, this is worse than I even thought it would be. I mean, we knew it was built to do this. We had Dr. Blaylock on, medical doctor and others 5 years ago, warning everybody how they did this in third world countries and Europe. But they're really doing it. And only abject ignorance is allowing it. And here's a Washington Post article. We paid $634 million for this Obamacare site, and all we got was a lousy 404 error. Well, Mike Adams has scanned it, and this article and others go over it. It is completely fake and not meant to work. It's because there is no site there. Do you understand? It's all a big joke. Here's another one right here that Mike Adams breaks down on Infowars.com. Warning, enrolling in Obamacare allows government to link your IP with your name. Just like the cash for clunkers, when it says, by coming here, we take control of your computer and you waive all your rights. And I've gone and read the agreements there. It's confirmed what Watson wrote about last week. We've now confirmed they are telling people, enrollees, in some of the big systems that now we're going to garnish your wages and we need your Social Security number. And now what we reported 2 weeks ago with Kit Daniels is now in the New York Post and the Associated Press yesterday, that it's an identity theft nightmare with the navigators, as they're called, as they hire all the acorn fraud groups to run it. This is a mafia takeover by the Democratic Party. The big insurance companies and banks get their cut. The Republican fat cats wrote it. They got theirs. The Common Core Ford Foundation takeover, they get theirs. So it's on. It's on, ladies and gentlemen. They're going to garnish your wages, grab your bank accounts, and take your tax returns, your tax refunds. And it's all being launched. And the law says it. And when you complain, they go, we're not going to take your money. But it's the law. Well, we are going to take your money. But I can't sign up. We're going to take your money. You're going to get nothing, and we're going to take the money. Now, you just, give us $10,000 more in Prince of Booby. You'll send you the $5 million or the $10 million or the $20 million. And they're just going, I mean, I was on the air today with Mancow, and he had Obama supporters in studio. He also has a TV show in Chicago at Simulcast. And they were arguing with me going, I need my free health care. I need my help. They just didn't know. Now, shifting gears, I want to show everybody up on Infowars.com, if you go to my Twitter, they pull up the name here. If you go into a tweet that I put out that said, Dear Leader, Obama issues official press behavior guideline booklet. Follow this or be disappeared. And it's obvious satire. It's a cartoon of a lapdog laying in Obama's lap with its tongue hanging out and its tail wagging. And it says, good doggy, play dead. And the dog is the media. And yes, they are killing the press right now. Even AP admitted it today. But if you look at the comments, there's a guy named Josh Gibbs who says, tell me again how Hitler designed the Olympic rings logo, laugh out loud. And you go to his site, it's all anti-Republican, how great Obamacare is, how Democrats have high IQs, how smart he is, the standard cult deal, okay? Josh Gibbs. Josh, I don't want to make fun of you and be mean to you, but when we come back, we aired video of trendy Austinites, Obama supporters, calling for everyone to have to wear helmets to walk down the street for everyone's safety. And by the way, in New Jersey, they're now making people wear helmets at recess. They're now banning playing football all over the country, just touch football. They're now banning everything. Okay, so this is real. And as long as you say it's for Obama, they do it. This is turning the whole world into a prison. All right? When we come back, I'm going to show you BBC and a bunch of other mainstream news, Hitler designing the Olympic rings. Just like when I say they put estrogen in the plastics to feminize males, I have the government documents, they make fun of that. They laugh about Tuskegee and syphilis because they can't admit their government isn't a big sweetie pie that loves them. So I'm going to show you. All right, so I want to handle just an issue here real quick of the denial of authoritarians that call themselves trendy. If you go up to my personal Twitter at RealAlexJones, and you see a joke political cartoon that I put out, it shows the lapdog media sitting in the lap of Obama. And I said, dear leader, Obama issues official press behavior guidelines booklet. Follow this or be disappeared. And actually, AP even came out today and said, report, Obama brings chilling effect on journalism and then admits they're arresting people. So and that's what we're talking about here. So even though I'm joking, actually it's true. Now, a bunch of Democrats go on, because you go to their own Twitters, and they're Democrats, all they talk about is Republicans all day. Hey, I'm a libertarian constitutionalist. I fought Bush and all his unconstitutional stuff, and I'm fighting Obama now. Now, we're in desperate straits now because Obama's got all youth doing anything he wants because it's trendy and you feel like you're part of the winning team. And this individual here, Josh Gibbs, you go to his site, he's a big Democrat. Tell me again how Hitler designed the Olympic rings, laugh out loud. And then you go there and it's all, ah, ha, ha, they don't like Obamacare, oh, they're kooks, ah, ha, ha. You can see all his work just battling the right-wingers as he sees it. Okay, let me stop right there. This is just like somebody that sent money off for the Nigerian email and cannot admit they've been conned. And I don't dislike you, sir. I care about you. I know it's crazy to hear that Hitler actually designed the first Volkswagens and even drew the design. I've seen the documentary films. I've read the books. I mean, he sketched it. He designed the first People's Wagon, Volkswagen. That's on record, sir, okay? He also designed the Olympic rings, and he also designed the torch ceremony, everything. The Olympics was nothing until 1936. This is well known. Now, I know it's laugh out loud. It isn't funny, okay? I've been telling you for 15 years since I learned about it that they put estrogen in the plastics to feminize males. We have the documents from the government, John P. Holder and others. Now, finally, it's well known about bisphenol A and breast cancer and all the rest of it, and erectile dysfunction in men and all the rest of it. That's mainstream news, but I'm not going to get off into that. I know it's funny for you. Let me just show you the BBC. Okay, right here. This is what I found in minutes, okay? I've seen the documentaries. It's even on Discovery Channel, Hitler in the Rings. I mean, this is a fact. Let me just show you. BBC right here. The Olympic torches passed, and then it goes into the whole deal, and here's Hitler's. First the rings were red, then they were gold. Hitler designed it, and it goes into the torch, everything planned by the Nazis, and the first big Olympics and all the rest of it right there. And then you can go pull up the Nazi origins, the Olympic torch, and the relay, and the 5 rings. Okay, and then Hitler drew that. You can look it up, okay? Just a fact. SS had daggers with that symbol on them. And that was out of the Vancouver newspaper. And then here's a bunch of others. Rings, torches have ties to Hitler's Nazi propaganda. On and on and on. Just type in the Nazi origins of Olympic, modern Olympics, and you'll just get all of it. For heaven's sakes, please, 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 please stop laughing out loud. I mean, we went out there to Austin, and we say we want to kill the gun owners. Yes, for Obama. We want to ban water for Obama. They sign it. These are adults. These are graduate students. These are scientists that have signed this, that tell us that they are scientists, that they are electrical engineers, that they are chemical engineers, that they have doctorates, and they will do it. And we said we want everyone to wear helmets, to walk down the street, to keep everybody safe, and they signed it. 14 out of 20. They're already making people play soccer have to wear helmets. They're already shutting dodgeball down nationwide. They're already saying you can't say mother and father or it's hateful. They're already banning the word brown bags. It's here. And I know you think you're on a power trip because you feel like you're part of it. You're not. Now, David Knight, you've got a big show in the next 2.5 hours coming up today while I take care of other things here at the office and also spend some time with family. I appreciate you coming in, nightly news host. Tell us what's coming up today, or if you have any comments on this.
Well, one of the things that's most frustrating is how every time you go back and draw parallels to what happened in Nazi Germany, people just dismiss it as hyperbole. It's not hyperbole. It's understatement. To look at what they're doing now, it's far worse. To call something Orwellian, it's far worse than George Orwell.
They're arresting people that show up at the Grand Canyon.
Absolutely. It's crazy. That's one of the most frustrating things about it. And I would suggest that he go look at a book about Frank Olson called A Terrible Mistake. These are declassified documents. His family has been, he was a research scientist.
His son's been on. They threw him out the top window.
At Fort Detrick, and he was there when they were developing in the 1950s, developing a lot of biological and chemical weapons with war criminals that they had brought over from Nazi Germany, from Japan. And, of course, they executed people for doing waterboarding in Japan. But now we've got Cheney and Rumsfeld.
But all they've got to do is say laugh out loud.
Exactly.
And then it's okay. Just laugh at us. And those of us done research, we're dumb, we're right-wingers, They're intellectual giants by laughing.
Yeah. If he reads that book, it'll be a real eye-opener.
Oh, no. He'll just laugh more. He'll just say that BBC isn't real.
We got information about whistleblowers and about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is really big. So
absolutely. Stuff they don't want you to know about coming up with David Knight.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in the rest of the show for Alex. Now, Alex mentioned in the first segment about this memo that was just sent to us anonymously from Fort Hood. And he pointed out, he read it, the first paragraph there, where they were saying that there's a growing trend of soldiers who are assigned to Fort Hood that are openly carrying firearms in private business establishments in the greater local area in an attempt to publicly assert their Second Amendment rights. This is really something that is being fired across the bow to try to intimidate people, I believe, from this rally that's coming up October the 19th at the Alamo. Very important rally. If you're here in Texas, you need to be there if you support the Second Amendment. Come and show your support. If you're not in Texas, you might even consider coming. But that's a very, very important demonstration that's going to be happening there. And one of the things that we've seen, remember, it wasn't that long ago. This is back in April this year. Remember the veteran Army Master Sergeant C.J. Gresham? And he was arrested. He was just out hunting with his son, and he had a rifle slung over his back, and a cop harassed him and then eventually arrested him. He had no idea. It's a very interesting video. If you watch it, it's an amazing video. And that was the excuse that the officer gave him. He said, in this day and age, people are alarmed when they see someone with what you have. In other words, a gun. He said, and they don't care what the law is. He kept asking the officer, what law have I broken? He said, we don't care what the law is. You've got a gun. That alarms us. That is, they charge him with rudely displaying a firearm. Having it slung over your back is not threatening anybody, as Alex pointed out. That is not against the law. The intention of the law was to say that you're not going to be waving a gun around, pointing it at a crowd, alarming people. If you've got it responsibly carried, slung over your arm, you're allowed to do that under the law. This is simply intimidation. And this is what C.J. Gresham said. He said, the easy wrong would have been to surrender my rights and to allow the cops to disarm me. That's the easy wrong to me. The hard right is putting ourselves on the line knowing that something could happen. And I got to say, that's still true. That's still true of all the people at Fort Hood who have taken an oath to the Constitution. It's a hard right that you need to support. It's hard to support your rights. It's hard to stand for your rights, but you need to do it. You, of all people. We've seen with the shutdown how the things that we've been telling you for quite some time, the documents that we've released showing that it's patriots, people who support the Constitution, people who are looking for a better way of life, people who support the right to keep and bear arms, veterans especially, are the enemies of Obama and the department. And it's not just Obama. This went back to the Patriot Act. This goes back to the Bush administration. This is a bipartisan thing. It's just every administration, it gets more obvious, it gets more direct, it gets more in your face with every successive administration. It doesn't really matter who it is. You can go back and look at health care. Do you think it would have been any different if we'd had Senator McCain as President McCain, or if we'd had Romney as President Romney? No. Romney wrote Obamacare with Ted Kennedy. They said they based it on it. It's very, very, very similar. There's no difference whatsoever. And you can see what McCain is doing. McCain is saying, hey, Obama was elected, obey him. Well, you know what? A lot of people who didn't want Obamacare, a lot of people who were upset about the bank bailouts were the core of the Tea Party movement. That's what they came together about. It was about, the Tea Party was about bank bailouts. It was about corporatism. And they were the ones who elected these members to Congress about Obamacare. That's why most of these members of Congress are there. They need to stand there and oppose this. That's why we have checks and balances. That's why we don't have a Caesar in government. We have a president who is subject to the checks and balances of the House, the Senate, and many other places, the states actually, with the 10th Amendment. But we've got a interview that Jakari Jackson did with a Patriot candidate for land commissioner, Jerry Patterson. And I want you to hear this, especially in light of what we've just seen come out of Fort Hood.
I'm here with Jerry Patterson, the next lieutenant governor. How are you doing, Mr. Patterson?
I'm doing really well.
So can you just explain to us the position of lieutenant governor and what you hope to achieve?
Well, the lieutenant governor is arguably the most powerful position in Texas government. And I'm not seeking power, but I frankly think that we are on the cusp of going the wrong direction in Texas. And we need somebody who is not afraid, somebody who's straight, and I mean straight in the sense that I tell you what I think, and somebody who has specific things that he or she, in this case he, wishes to accomplish. And if you go to my website, votepatterson.com, unlike all the other candidates, you're going to see a very detailed enumeration of things having to do with the Second Amendment, and I encourage folks to go and read what I say about that. Water, transportation, education, immigration. So I think folks are looking for leadership, and I think we have too many candidates who are more interested in looking good and who are more interested in the next election than the next generation. And I'm only focused on doing what I think is right. Like some politicians and some office holders from the past in Texas, we have too few of them today.
Recently, we saw the issues with the people at the Texas Capitol building and the people out there carrying their black powder pistols. And it's my understanding that you actually wrote that law.
The definitions in Chapter 46, 01 definitions in this chapter, firearm does not include antique or curio firearm manufactured before 1899 or a replica of an antique or curio firearm manufactured before 1899, but only if the replica does not use rimfire or centerfire ammunition. And mine is a ball and cap.
I was the author of the Texas Concealed Handgun Law in 1995, and one of the items of unfinished business was I wanted to make these cap and ball replica revolvers not firearms under the law. So after I left the legislature, I wrote this statute. I gave it to a state rep and a state senator. They passed it, testified in favor of it. So I know the law very well. And a cap and ball revolver that does not shoot centerfire, rimfire ammunition under the law is not a firearm. And that's under state and federal law. So they had no firearm. And their arrest was unlawful. The law says you have to carry this firearm in a manner calculated to alarm. Now, carrying a pistol in a holster is not calculated to alarm. And think about the interesting testimony that's going to be, I guess, at trial, when at the same time that we're arresting this guy for carrying an antique replica pistol that under the law is not a firearm, at the same time, right there, were citizens lawfully carrying ARs and AKs, sling arms, and they weren't arrested. So to the average bystander walking around, assuming that anybody was alarmed, and frankly they should not be, why would you arrest a guy with an antique pistol that's not even a firearm under federal or state law? But then it's okay with the AKs and the ARs. It should be okay with AKs and ARs. That is the law in Texas. Open carry of a long gun is not unlawful in Texas. And so what we have here is somebody, and I don't know, I doubt that it was the DPS officer, but somebody decided to make up law and say, I'm alarmed. You know, you have to have a reasonable standard to this. You can't just say, I'm alarmed. I mean, there are people who are easily alarmed. They don't make law either. Somebody has to have a reasonable standard. These gentlemen were arrested unlawfully. They broke no law, and I'm anxious to see how this turns out at trial.
Now, one of the things I'm anxious to see is this rally we have coming up on October 19th, where people are going to gather at the Alamo, carrying their long guns slung over their shoulders. Some people may have loaded firearms.
There's several different groups. In my view, they ought to kind of get together and just pick one person to be in charge of all this, because San Antonio PD has not been a friend of the Second Amendment.
This isn't about violating people's rights. It's not about gun control. It's not about politics. It's about the state law. If the firearm is carried in a manner calculated to cause alarm.
They consistently, repetitively, even going back 20 years when I carried the concealed handgun law, San Antonio PD was opposed to it. Now, there were other police officers and police chiefs that were opposed to it, most of whom have come around and say, you know, I was wrong. DA in Harris County, Johnny Holmes, was adamantly opposed to it and wrote me a letter about 3 years after we passed it and says, I was wrong. So it's really refreshing to see some folks fess up when they're wrong, but San Antonio PD has a policy about open carry, and they are not going to allow it. They have no authority to make up the law, and that's what they're doing. So I hope that San Antonio PD complies with the law.
Now, as more and more people move here to Texas, we see Rick Perry campaigning to get people to come here to the state of Texas. Does this concern you at all? Because we have many people with many different ideologies.
It does concern me. We have people moving here from foreign countries like California that I am concerned about. As long as they come to Texas and they're coming here because they share our values, they share our belief in the Second Amendment, which has nothing to do with hunting. It has nothing to do with recreational use. It has nothing to do with collecting. It has only to do with my God-given, constitutionally enumerated right to keep and bear arms to defend myself against a criminal element or an oppressive government. That's what it's about. And as long as they believe that way, as well as the other freedoms, and as long as they believe that we, don't need any more government regulation, that we have too much government, and they're coming here for those reasons, then I'm fine with it. I don't care where they come from. And it's a good thing. People came to Texas in the 1830s and 1840s and 60s because they were seeking liberty and opportunity. Same thing today. But they, in my view, they need to, understand our values may be different than the values where they came from.
Are you an advocate for state nullification?
We have the ability under the Constitution to ignore whatever law is unconstitutional. Now, how do you make that determination? If the federal government were to pass a law and say, well, you can no longer carry your firearm, or we're going to pass a law that says we're going to outlaw open carry of long guns, yeah, that would be an unconstitutional law. And frankly, I don't know if nullification, I just go with ignoring. As land commissioner, I travel quite a bit. I've spent quite a bit of time in the Big Bend National Park because we have some land adjacent to it. At one time, you could not carry in a national park. You couldn't possess a firearm. I ignored it. Told the San Antonio newspaper I ignored it. They wrote an editorial saying he ignores the law. I said, I'm sorry, that's not the law. It's unconstitutional. When I go into border areas along the Texas border, I'm armed. And unless it's private property, where the private property owner has a right to tell me I can't be there armed, but if it's public property, I'm armed. And so I ignore laws that I believe to be unconstitutional.
As far as those unconstitutional laws, do you think that extends to the TSA?
I think it extends to the TSA in some circumstances. It depends on how the TSA conducts themselves. Cavity searches, of course, we have some problems with cavity searches here in Texas with other law enforcement agencies, but it extends to how they conduct themselves. What do they do? And I would submit to you that sometimes they are infringing on the rights and the personal rights of privacy. Other times they are not. I don't think you can blanket make a statement on that many TSA officers. I try not to fly commercial if I can help it. I got a little airplane, I fly it, or I drive.
Now, we see the city of Chicago has now been deemed the murder capital of the United States of America, even though it has some of the strictest gun laws. So let me ask you, how do you feel about gun-free zones?
Well, they're a target-rich environment for the criminal element. I mean, I talk about this a great deal. I mean, I'm probably the guy that most people call when it comes to the Second Amendment and firearms. And I use the analogy, had I been in the theater in Aurora, Colorado, fewer people would have died. And that was a gun-free zone. It was private property, and they had banned carry. And people, when I say that, they look at me and say, oh, that's impossible. I mean, that guy had You know, he had an AR and he had body armor and all of that stuff. And I say, look, the first time someone had returned fire to that, in the direction of that shooter, the first time a round had gone off and it didn't come from the shooter, the dynamic would have changed. You don't have to bring him down to save lives. And instead of that shooter just calmly walking up and down the aisles, you know, just shooting cowering theater goers as they cowered on the floor, shooting in the back of the head, the first time you popped a round off, that shooter would have had to pay attention to something else. The dynamic would have changed. Similarly, in Virginia Tech, 32 people died, gun-free zone. And by the way, that shooter had passed a background check. He was mentally ill, had been adjudicated mentally ill, passed the check anyway. All of these venues, they're gun-free zones. And, you know, when I passed the concealed handgun law, we had to put some gun-free zones to get the votes I needed. Over the years, we have eliminated and removed many of those gun-free locations. One of them is kind of funny. One of the locations that was prohibited initially was churches. Well, I believe that violates the separation. There is no separation, but it violates the church ability to do what they wish. But, you know, frankly, if you have, you know, a congregation that's packing, the sermons are, you know, much shorter and much more to the point. But we continue to eliminate gun-free zones. A gun-free zone is nothing more than an invitation.
You have an A+ rating from the NRA, so guns are definitely an important issue to you. But what else do the people of Texas need to know?
Well, you know, I was a guy who, probably the three most significant items that I passed when I was in the Senate, I repealed the motorcycle helmet law. That's kind of a liberty thing. And, you know, I passed the concealed handgun law. I passed a constitutional amendment to allow citizens to access their home equity without government interference and telling them for what you know, purpose they can access their home equity. So I'm kind of a pro-liberty guy. You know, I believe that government, in its zeal to raise the floor and bring everybody up, has to recognize that in doing so, in order to fund that, you also have to lower the ceiling. I want the opportunity in Texas to make a mistake. Because whether that's a financial mistake, you know, investing my money, but because without that opportunity to take choices and take chances, then we also have the diminished opportunities to succeed. You know, I grew up in Texas, and I went to school in the 50s. Everything was open to me. And today, you know, I have children, I have grandchildren. I want them to have those same opportunities. And I see an oppressive federal government that with a do-gooder mentality continues to pass statutes such as the Endangered Species Act, you know, a lot of other so-called well-intended items of legislation. That mindset is not here in Texas, and we should be thankful for that, but it's creeping this way. And we have to, in my view, maintain Texas as it is and as it was. And not only is that good for Texas, Texas has the ability to lead and redeem this nation because we are liberty. And there are a few other states, but we're the prime state that can redeem this nation. VotePatterson.com.
All right, Jerry Patterson, thank you for your time, sir.
All right, thank you, Jakari.
Wow, that was a great report. He's got my vote, I tell you. I just came here from North Carolina. In North Carolina, we have open carry. Texas doesn't have open carry. You got people walking around here like Sheriff Woody, no gun in their holster. Of all places, Texas. So that's one of the things that needs to be changed, and that's what that little back and forth there at the Capitol was about. You got an organization there. They're going to be at the Alamo along with some other organizations trying to get open carry and stated here. Open carry is a deterrent. Having a gun is a deterrent. You want peaceful, law-abiding citizens to be armed. There's an article today at Infowars, another defensive gun use that gun haters will ignore. This is a guy who was in Charlotte, I believe, and he had someone try to rob him with a stun gun, and he just pulled out his gun, no shots were fired, and of course, Piers Morgan won't pay any attention to that. We will. That's very effective. A non-violent defense. It's a deterrent. We need more of that. And we'll be right back on the Infowars radio station. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex. I just want to tell you that we just got in a shipment of nascent iodine, Survival Shield. As you know, we were back ordered. It sold out immediately. And we just got in another huge shipment, so that's available right now at InfoWarsStore.com. And we're going to be talking to Anthony Gucciardi later in the show about recent developments at Fukushima, as well as information you may not know about nuclear reactors here in the United States and the many ways that we share the same risks with Fukushima. People have always looked at the risks of nuclear reactors going critical, but they've not really looked at the fuel pools. And Fukushima has really kind of put that on the radar. And we even have the former head of the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, saying that all of our reactors share the same common fault with Fukushima and calling for all of them to be shut down. Now, that's the former head of the NRC. But of course, nuclear is Obama's favorite source of power. He's trying to shut down every coal plant that he can because of this imaginary CO2 crisis. They like to call it carbon because they don't want you to think of it as CO2. They want you to think of it as something dirty like carbon. So they're trying to shut all those down and substitute nuclear. And people don't realize the risks involved with nuclear, the long-term risks of trying to keep these fuel pools safe, the expense of trying to keep them cooled and contained for decades, for hundreds of years, for millennia. That's a tremendous burden on the economy, and it's a tremendous burden on energy. And yet they have the audacity to say, many of Obama's supporters in the environmentalist community, and there's a lot of environmentalists who are very much opposed to nuclear reactors, and they should be. But a lot of them are trying to tell us that nuclear is greener than photovoltaics. Give me a break. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. It's simply corporatism. This is big business at work, just like we see with the banks, just like we see with Obamacare. I guess I should call it Obama Scare. And we're going to be talking about some recent developments with that, where he's trying to scare people into passing Obamacare. But we've also got a whistleblower coming up later in the show, in the next hour. And, you know, Alex was talking to a whistleblower yesterday, Tosh Plumley, and it was the third time he's been on the show talking about Benghazi and developments there. And he tried to go through regular channels, and nobody would listen to him. He went to big corporate media. They sat on the story. And yesterday he was talking about that because he's now getting pressure from the Department of Justice. And he came back on the show talking about the pressure that he was getting, talking about Benghazi and the trading of arms and what that was all really about. And he was saying that Fox News is sitting on the story. Well, he got a call after our show. Evidently, Fox News is listening to our show and said, no, they're going to air the interview. So we're glad to see that happening. We're glad to get this information out, and we're glad to pressure the corporate media into actually reporting some of this stuff. Now, the whistleblower we've got on in the next hour is going to be talking about corruption, and the same thing happened to him. He went through regular channels within the organization that he was working for. Then he went to law enforcement, the Department of Justice, the FBI. Nobody did anything about that. Then he went to media. He had Brian Ross from NBC interview him, sitting on the interview. So we had him on the nightly news last week, and we're going to have a concise recap of that interview here in the next hour. And we're going to talk about exactly what's going on with that and why the corporate media won't report that. But that's going to be coming up in the next hour. Now, we were just talking before the break about guns and about Jerry Patterson, who's running for land commissioner here in Texas, big, strong supporter of the Second Amendment. And there's a rally coming up October 19th at the Alamo. We need everybody to be there. We got Stuart Rhodes, I believe, is going to be there. He was here yesterday in studio with Oath Keepers. And we're looking forward to seeing everybody who supports the Second Amendment at that rally on October 19th. Be right back.
Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. He's Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network. And now, live from Austin, Texas, Alex Jones.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex Jones. Now, we've got a whistleblower joining us at the bottom of the hour, and he's going to be having some big information about banks that are too big to jail. You've heard the story before, but this is something that maybe you haven't heard, and we're going to try to get that out. Mainstream media has been sitting on this story, so we're going to try to get it some more exposure. We want to talk a little bit more about Obamacare. You know, they're selling this as it's something that's there to help the poor. But look at what's going on with the insurance companies' stocks. We've been telling you for a long time here at Infowars that this is about insurance companies. that they wrote it, that they're profiting from it. And for the last 4 years, their stocks, the largest insurance company stocks, have been skyrocketing, going up anywhere from 2 to 5 times. Don Salazar pointed that out in an article last week. And now we know why, because people are starting to get their estimates back from Obamacare, and they're seeing that, of course, their insurance rates are doubling. That's just for starters. That's just the beginning. They're going to continue to go up from there. You think they're going to go down on your insurance rates? They never go down on insurance rates. But, of course, it's there to help the poor. But we found out yesterday that they're actually looking at credit scores. Now, today we've got some interesting walk back on that. That was a lead navigator that came up with that story. Today she's trying to walk that back. We're going to take a look at that in the next segment. But the question is, if they're going to look at credit scores, and that's going to be a basis, what she said yesterday, we're going to go with what she said yesterday, because she was one of the lead navigators, or the lead navigator in Florida. After she talked at some length with reporters about that, she came back the next day and tried to walk that back. I think the real true story is what she really came out with at the beginning. And what she said was that the insurance provider could look at your credit score and decide if they don't want you in their health insurance plan, that the insurance company is going to make that call. And see, the insurance companies are not allowed to exclude somebody because they've got a pre-existing condition. But do you think that maybe if somebody's had cancer or a major illness, let's say open heart surgery, whatever, as expensive as that is, as expensive as it is even with your deductible, do you think that they might have a credit problem? A good chance. In other words, it's a way for the insurance companies to backdoor keeping out people with pre-existing conditions. But ask yourself this. Do you think that poor people, who this is all about helping poor people, do you think that poor people have high credit ratings, or do they have low credit ratings? If the insurance companies are collecting this information, and that's yet another story, that's a huge part of this, is the total blanket amount of information that these insurance companies are getting on everybody. And the fact that they are looking at your credit score, they're getting your Social Security number, they're getting everything from you. And as McAfee pointed out when he was on the Alex Jones show the other day, the fellow that if you've got a PC, you've got a McAfee software on there about viruses and security. He's an expert on security, and he said it was the most insecure system he had ever seen. There's no way to verify that anybody is a legitimate insurance provider. Instead, they can pose as an insurance provider, and you turn over everything about your life, all the details about your life. There's no guarantees about that you're giving that to a verified person. So it's absolutely insecure, and of course it's not working. They don't want people to know at this point how much it's going to cost, is my opinion. A lot of us believe that. It's a terrible way to get into your computer. Once they get your IP, they can go in and they can match that to your name. It's one of the most massive thefts of identity we have ever seen. And we're going to look a little bit more carefully about this credit score thing and let you decide about that. We'll be right back with a couple of clips from that. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex Jones. Now, in the last hour, we had an interview that Jakari Jackson did with Jerry Patterson, and he is the Texas Land Commissioner. I want to clarify this. He is running for Lieutenant Governor. I think I mentioned that he was running for Land Commissioner, but he is Land Commissioner, and he is running for Lieutenant Governor. A great friend of the Second Amendment, really understands what that is, and a great patriot, actually. He really understands the Constitution. Check out that interview with him if you didn't get a chance to hear that. And it's interesting to look at this because, in contrast, we see what happened just recently in Connecticut. We had Connecticut cops seize a 69-year-old's 274 legal guns and charged him with 17 felonies. Now, this guy, his name is Callahan. He's 69 years old. On Monday, they charged him with 11 counts of illegal possession of explosives and 6 counts of first-degree reckless endangerment after finding 274 guns in his home in Fairfield, Connecticut. Evidently, if you've got too many guns, that's reckless. Just like if you have a gun slung over your shoulder, that's reckless as well. That's scary. That's alarming. He is a retired chemist who is also an amateur rocketeer, and at least some of the chemicals found appear to be for his rocketry hobby. The lawyer said that he's a gun collector, and they are all registered. They're all legal. And in addition, he's an amateur rocketeer. He shoots his own small rockets, and a lot of what he had was related to rocketry. He's even in the Skeet Shooting Hall of Fame. But because they found some M80 fireworks and some jet fuel, which he says he uses in his classic Corvette. He's got a court appearance for October the 16th. This is why people need to stand up for this. If you're in Texas, get to the Alamo. October the 19th, we have a stand for gun rights, and we all need to stand together. We're going to be there shooting cameras. Hopefully nothing will happen other than that. But we have to stand up for our rights or we lose them. So make sure you get there October the 19th at the Alamo. It's going to be a large demonstration for gun rights. And we're going to have speakers there talking about it. And of all places, I can't think of a better place than the Alamo. You know, I was just looking at some Alamo history, and it was Bowie, who, you've heard the Come and Take It, that was at Gonzales, Texas, and they had the cannon flag there. But it was actually a couple of years before the Alamo that the Mexican tyrants actually tried to collect guns. And Bowie had moved to the area. He had become a Mexican citizen. He had married the daughter of a Mexican, I think he was a mayor. He had built a factory there. He was trying to be a productive citizen, like many people here in the U.S. And when they came around to collect the guns, this was a general before Santa Anna, he and some other guys basically ambushed them and shot them up. And surprisingly, nothing happened for a couple of years until Santa Anna started coming around, and then they started the gun confiscation again. That's where you see the Gonzales flag with the cannon on it, Come and Take It. And then the shooting really started. You had the Alamo, and then you had Goliad, which was a massacre of troops who had surrendered. And they took them out the next day and said, we're going to send you home. Took them out, lined them up in the woods, and shot most of them. Some of them ran through the woods and got away. After those two incidents, they understood that it was either take down the tyrant or he's going to take you down. We need to understand that they're coming after our gun rights around the fringes. That's exactly what General McChrystal said back in January when they were trying to push all this gun legislation in the wake of Sandy Hook. He said, we've been moving this around the edges, and I'm paraphrasing him here, but he used the term, we've been legislating around the edges, and we need to get very serious and go for the main thing. So in other words, he was saying, we've been infringing their gun rights. They're never going to come and take them right away at the very beginning. Instead, they're going to set up a lot of little entrapments, things that they can use to harass gun owners, to arrest them if they violate the technicalities of the law. And so that's the way that it starts. But we need to roll that back before it gets into something even more serious. Now, the other big thing going on today is, of course, Obamacare. And there's a breaking story that we've got up on prisonplanet.com. David Seaman pointed out that the man that's going to be heading up a congressional NSA reform package is actually the one who authored CISPA. And we're going to be talking about that later. But let's go to a clip that we have. This was Obama running in 2008, and he was speaking on the Ellen DeGeneres show, and he was talking about the distinctions between Hillary, who wanted mandated health care, and what he wanted.
And we've had an ongoing discussion about health care. Both of us want to provide health care to all Americans. There's a slight difference, and her plan is a good one, but she mandates that everybody buy health care. She'd have the government force every individual to buy insurance, and I don't have such a mandate because I don't think the problem is that people don't want health insurance, it's that they can't afford it. So I focus more on lowering costs, and this is a modest difference, but it's one that she's tried to elevate, arguing that because I don't force people to buy health care that I'm not insuring everybody. Well, if things were that easy, I could mandate everybody buy a house, and and that would solve the problem of homelessness. It doesn't.
Yeah, remember that? He's going to lower the cost. That's what he's really concerned about. You know, that's the Affordable Health Care Act. Well, how does doubling people's insurance lower the cost? The insurance companies know what's in this. They wrote the law. They knew what was in this years ago. That's why their stocks have gone up by a factor of 2 to 5 over the last 4 years, as we pointed out. And notice what he says. He doesn't want mandates. Hillary Clinton wanted mandates. He said if mandating fixed things, then he could mandate everybody to buy a house, and that would cure the problem of homelessness, except that homeless people can't afford to buy a house. But now let's look at what was said this week by the lead navigator in Florida, the person who is who's been trained by the feds to explain how Obamacare works. That's what a navigator is. She's going to help people navigate through the system. She's been trained to explain to them exactly what Obamacare is about. This is what she said in an interview.
Packham, who has gone through training to teach people how to enroll in health care through the Affordable Care Act, admits she gave bad information about credit scores affecting people's eligibility. How does someone in your position get that wrong?
It was just a mistake. I mean, I'd been hearing from several people that they were getting links, they were getting those questions from Experian.
Some people are being asked during the enrollment process to link to Experian, one of the credit reporting bureaus. But we learned today from the Department of Health and Human Services that is only to verify their identity. A spokesperson went on to say in an email, insurers are not allowed to factor in credit scores when setting premiums, and at no point in the application process are people's scores accessed. But here's what Packham told us about credit scores yesterday.
So that health insurance providers can make an educated decision about who to insure based on if somebody is defaulting on all their bills, they may not want to have them in their part of their health plan.
Packham wouldn't say today how she came up with such a detailed explanation, but does admit it was wrong. People just want to know, you've been through training.
Right.
You are educating people about the process. How does this happen?
It's human error.
Now, misinformation is exactly what critics of the Affordable Care Act have been complaining about all the time. And yesterday was an example of misinformation. Unfortunately, it was coming from someone who really should know better.
Yeah, she really should know better. And I think she did know better. I don't know which version is true. Run the clip from yesterday from about 13 seconds in, because she went over this in a great deal of detail yesterday. It wasn't just one statement that she made off the mark. She emphasized that. She was saying insurance providers can look at your credit score and decide if they don't want you in their plan. The insurance company makes the call. She talked about how, yeah, that's perfectly reasonable because, you know, if you're not paying your bills, they want to make sure that they're going to get their money. That's what it's about. It's about getting the money to the insurance companies. Understand there's a difference between health insurance and health care, just like there's a difference between education and school. You know, you can get an education at school, but you don't necessarily need to have a school to get an education. The same thing is true of health insurance and health care. You can get health care without having health insurance. Let's go to that clip right now.
How much they pay.
Well, they say it was explained to us like this. It's like buying a house or a car. Your credit score and other factors can determine your interest rate. In this case, it can determine how much you pay in premiums.
People are asking, why is that being asked of me?
And Packham is one of many people called
Okay,
Navigate.
you can pull it out right now. See, that's exactly what she, and in that original interview that they played, she goes on for quite some time with the quotes that I just gave you. And like he said, it's just like buying a house. I find that kind of ironic because it is just like buying a house. If you can't afford a house because you're homeless, because you're poor, just mandating it doesn't solve anything. And it doesn't solve anything with the health care either. This is not a transference of benefits from the middle class or from the wealthy, as they like to imagine, to the poor. We just had a report earlier this week where they were talking to people who had voted for Obama, and they were very distressed to see that their insurance rates were doubling or more. And one person said, I wanted to provide health care for the poor. I just didn't know that it would be me paying for it. See, they thought they were going to practice charity with somebody else's money, like Ted Kennedy. You know, he was one of the richest men in the country, and of course, he loved to practice charity with other people's money. Didn't like to practice it so much with his money. But there's a lot of people who think that they're going to vote for this largesse out of the government, out of money that's just printed out of thin air, money that we borrow from future generations, a debt that we pile upon them, because, you know, we only pay, our income tax only pays to cover the interest on our debt. We've been on an interest-only loan from the giant banks since they created the Federal Reserve and the income tax nearly 100 years ago. And it's not getting any better. That's what this debt ceiling is about. They want to keep getting us in farther and farther into debt. And if you want to look at a hockey stick graph, don't look at the temperatures, because that's not going up like a hockey stick. What's going up like a hockey stick is our indebtedness. The banks are getting us into a crushing debt that we'll never be able to pay. Then they're going to pull the rug out from underneath us. And this is all about a massive transference of wealth and power from the American people to a few corporatists who run the government. And we're going to be talking about some of those banks coming right up in an interview with a whistleblower. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex Jones, and we have a whistleblower talking about corruption and, of all places, banks. Who'd have thought? I mean, banks corrupt? I don't know. Actually, it's a pretty extensive story. This is something we've seen over and over again. Back in 2010, Bloomberg was talking about a different bank corruption story, and that one he was talking about banks that were financing Mexico gangs, and it was, at that time, Wachovia and Bank of America. This is a story, this was an event that happened back in 2006. The story is actually from 2010, and they're talking about how some suspicious soldiers found in a plane that had landed near Mexico City 128 black suitcases packed with 5.7 tons of cocaine valued at $100 million. The stash was supposed to have been delivered to Caracas to drug traffickers in Toluca near Mexico City. The smugglers had bought the plane, which was a DC-9, with laundered money that they transferred through two of the biggest banks in the U.S., Wachovia and Bank of America. And that was $378 billion over a period of 2004 to 2007, the largest largest money laundering case in history. It was a sum that was equal to 1/3 of Mexico's gross national product. And this is what a person who worked at Wachovia at the time, one of the two banks that was involved in it, and of course, Wachovia was subsequently bought by Wells Fargo, so then Wells Fargo was involved in the litigation. And this former Wachovia anti-money laundering unit person he was the director of that unit, Martin Woods, said, "It's the banks laundering money for the cartels that finances the tragedy." A tragedy of, as they pointed out, since 2006 and the 4 years between the time of that drug smuggling in 2006 and the time this article was written in 2010, there had been 22,000 people killed in the drug wars in Mexico. Of course, it's been another 3 years now. That total is much, much greater. It's a much more dangerous situation than you've got going in Afghanistan, for example. But he said that he quit the bank in disgust after executives ignored his documentation that drug dealers were funneling money through Wachovia's branch network. And that's a similar story to what we have today with the person who's joining us, Everett Stern. He was working at a different bank. He was not working at Wachovia or Bank of America, but he was working at HSBC. And as this article from Bloomberg pointed out, no U.S. bank, Wells Fargo included, has ever been indicted for violating either the Bank Secrecy Act or any other federal law. And we learned back in March of this year, after this HSBC story broke about their money laundering issues, they were given a slap on the wrist, and the Assistant Attorney General, Lanny Brewer, said, defending the fact that they got such a small slap on the wrist, he said, had the U.S. authorities decided to press criminal charges on any of the bank officers, or personal fines on any of those bank officers, or to pull their banking license, the future of the institution would have been under threat. HSBC, he's talking about. And the entire banking system would have been destabilized. See, the problem is when you don't jail people who do these types of things because they're so big, because you're going to tolerate corruption from people just because of the size they are and because of the influence that they've purchased with the government. The institution that's threatened is not HSB. The institution that is threatened is the integrity of the United States government. And we've seen this time and time again from our current Department of Justice, not prosecuting people involved in the Fast and Furious scandals, not prosecuting people involved in Benghazi, and of course, not prosecuting HSB. And shortly after that, there was another case with USB, which is a Swiss bank. You know, HSB is a Hong Kong, Shanghai bank. USB is a Swiss bank. And it was just about a week later that the same Assistant Attorney General, Lanny Brewer, went back to the press. And this time, it wasn't about money laundering, but it was about LIBOR. And he said, well, they weren't going to really do anything to UBS as well. And he said, our goal here is not to destroy a major financial institution. And the people that were there pointed out to him, they said, this is a bank that has broken the law before because they've been involved in 2009 in a major tax evasion case. And they said, why aren't you tougher? And he says, I don't know what tougher means. Obviously, he doesn't. Well, we have someone on the line with us, Everett Stern, and he is telling us about the HSBC money laundering. Now, in the letter that he sent to Ben Bernanke, pointed out that he was working at HSBC in 2010 and 2011. He saw systemic and blatant violations of the anti-money laundering laws and a 2010 cease and desist order. He had joined them after that cease and desist order, and he's going to tell us what was continuing to go on there right after we come back. These are violations that were not covered by the Federal Reserve settlement with HSBC that was in 2012. And this is a breaking story. We've got him right after the... Now, as I was telling you just before the break, we've seen time and again some of the largest banks in America involved in money laundering with drug cartels, some of the largest drug cartels, some of the largest drug busts. We've seen tremendous amounts of money involved, and yet we haven't seen anybody from any of these banks go to jail. Now, we recently had a money laundering case that was talked about in March of this year, and when it was brought up, the Attorney General decided that they were going to go very light on HSBC. And they gave them essentially a slap on the wrist. They fined them $1.9 billion, which sounds like a lot of money, but that was only 5 weeks' worth of their income. And considering the amount of time that this had been going on and the details of what had happened, people were generally shocked at what happened. But then right after that, we saw the same thing happen with the LIBOR scandal involving huge amounts of money and manipulation of markets. And again, the Department of Justice just gave them a pass and said, these banks are too big to fail. We have to worry about the banks more than we have to worry about the integrity of our government, more than we have to worry about the safety and the security of our citizens. Because, you know, the war on drugs and the war on terror, we're supposed to be fighting those, and yet it's the government that is funding it and these giant banks that are funding it. We have on line with us Everett Stern, and he was working at HSB. How you doing, Everett?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
Doing fine. Now, this case that just came out in March, they had been given a cease and desist order back in 2010. The money laundering had been going on from 2004 to 2010, and they said they were going to stop that. And that was part of the terms of why they went light on them. They, in the settlement agreements, they cited HSBC's cooperation and remediation efforts as a basis for leniency in the terms imposed, and yet you started after this cease and desist order was in, after they supposedly had taken measures to stop the money laundering. Tell us about what you saw when you were there. Tell us about your experience and the experience of people that you saw that were hired there.
Yeah, sure. First, before I do that, if I could just comment that, you know, what the Obama administration doesn't understand is that, you know, by giving a slap on the wrist to these banks and by engaging in these deferred prosecution agreements, you know, you know, their concern is that it will cause a financial crisis if they criminally prosecute these banks. And what's not being understood here is that if there's another 9/11, that's going to cause another financial crisis. I think that's being missed. But when I started in October of 2010, you know, I was part of the crew that was brought in to clean up their act, and you know, what HSBC did was create a sham anti-money laundering compliance program. I mean, they went ahead and they took their department of 15 compliance officers, if you want to even call them that, and they sold off their credit card division to Capital One, fired a whole bunch of debt collectors and customer service reps, and then about a week later, they rehired them as anti-money laundering compliance officers, which is crazy to improve transactions.
These are people who had no experience in money laundering, no experience in how to detect that, or they were just debt collectors that were rehired.
Right, exactly. I mean, to be honest with you, I wouldn't even trust them to collect debt. So, you know, it's very, very concerning that you know, they were going ahead to approve these transactions, but you know, that's what HSBC wanted. They wanted a system that, and they encouraged a culture to facilitate terrorist financing and the financing of drug cartels.
Now, when you were there, what kind of work did they give you to do? I memean, did they give you any training once you got? You didn't have any experience in money laundering. Did they give you any training when they brought you in?
No, no. I mean, what I had to do when I got there was I went, because the main money laundering facility is in Newcastle, Delaware. So what I went ahead and went to the University of Delaware Library, checked out as many books as possible on money laundering, and taught myself early in the morning, before work, and after. You know, I figured out very quickly what they were doing. And I started reporting and passing information to the CIA 3 weeks in, and did that for over a year.
You didn't hear anything back from the CIA, and eventually you went to the FBI, and you also gave that information to them, and they were investigating HSBC for these very things at the time, and HSBC was under a cease and desist order, and yet, did you hear anything back from the FBI or the CIA?
You know, I did not. I communicated with the FBI greatly, and they were just as upset with the deferred prosecution agreement as I was. You know, my attorneys did file with the SEC to go after, asking the SEC and the Department of Justice to reopen the investigation into HSBC, because my evidence was not included in that deferred prosecution agreement. I recently met with the chairwoman of the House Finance Committee, and the SEC is investigating this case right now.
Now, the kinds of things that you saw there, tell us a little bit about how they would look for money laundering, and how you noticed that there were signs that maybe there were deliberate efforts to get around the traps that the computer software would look for, specific names, right? Yeah,
sure. So OFAC lists has a list of people that we can't do business with. So that ranges from terrorists, drug cartels, Russian mobsters, you know, just any bad guy you can possibly think of. And the bank has provided this list, and wire transfers are not allowed to go to those people. So maybe to give a perfect example, there was a group of a chain of supermarkets in Africa, in Gambia specifically, called Kariba Supermarket. And Kariba Supermarkets was owned by Tajiko, which is a company in Beirut, which is owned by the Tajaim brothers, who are financiers of Hezbollah. So the money was moving from Kariba Supermarkets, where people were buying groceries, which was being converted into terrorist funds, and HSBC was facilitating these transactions. Now, according to OFAC, those transactions should not have been going through. So I saw, though, what was going on was criminal manipulation of the wire filter, so that the wire filter HSBC has contains all of those names. But for instance, with Tajiko, which is spelled Tajco, in the actual wire filter, it would be Taj.co, or on the payments, it would be, Taj/co. Or they would add these dots and dashes to not match with the wire filter, so the payments would go through. I mean, it's blatant criminal manipulation. Right.
If you put that period in there, somebody just glances at that, or an extra space, they may not notice that. But the computer was looking for an exact character match. So they could just go in and put a period or a space or a dash, and the computer would not pick it up. So you're looking, and the computer actually has the correct list of people that are flagged as money launderers. And these are organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, as well as drug cartels like the Zeta drug cartel and the Sinaloa drug cartel. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
So this is so it looks like blatant manipulation. So you contact the FBI, and this is at the time. No, you didn't.
The FBI came involved after I left HSBC.
Okay.
So I first went to the Central Intelligence Agency because before I got to HSBC, while I was in college and in business school completing my MBA, I was a candidate for the clandestine service. So, which certainly did not make me any better or less of a money laundering officer. But I felt I have tremendous respect for the CIA, and I these are national security issues dealing with foreign entities. and terrorists, and I had to get them this information. Not only that, but what HSBC did was they went and they hired the former top FBI counterintelligence agent to run the department, and I felt the FBI was compromised. And David, if I can just note here that I think that individual the FBI counterintelligence agent needs to go back to the academy, because I got past this counterintelligence for over a year.
Wow. So after you left, you were there for about a year, and then after you left, you did contact the FBI. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the Department of Justice, the FBI, knows that they've got complaints that it looks like they're manipulating the names of these people so they can get past the filters. And, of course, under the Bank Secrecy Act, you're supposed to, as a bank, know your customer, and you're supposed to verify that they're a legitimate customer, and you're supposed to keep track of that and report. Anything over $10,000 is reported to the federal government. So, of course, in the Bank Secrecy Act, there is no bank secrecy. That's typically the way that the government does things. They give them a name for something that is exactly the opposite. But under the Bank Secrecy Act, they have an obligation to know who these people are so that they're not participating in the war on drugs or the war on terror. And yet, not surprisingly to those who listen to Infowars, we see that the large banks who have, we believe, control of the government are really running and financing this war on terror and this war on drugs. So what happens when you give it to the FBI? Do they do anything with it?
Yeah, well, let me just do a brief comment on something that you just said. So, for instance, the Know Your Customer rule is part of the Bank Secrecy Act. I mean, in theory, the Bank Secrecy, the KYC or Know Your Customer, is supposed to work. But what happened was that at HSBC, there were a tremendous amount of alerts being generated, and there was multiple backlogs of alerts. We're talking like 50,000, 100,000. So you can think of each alert as an investigation. Mm-hmm. So the whole point of a legitimate anti-money laundering program is to facilitate SARS, which is a suspicious activity report, which is a report that gets reported to the Treasury. Now, HSBC didn't want those SARs to be written because those SARs take time, and we needed to clear backlogs. There was no time. So we had to prevent SARs from being written, and they created a very good system on how to do that, and I have evidence of it. And what the FBI counterintelligence agent did was he decided to go create more of a leniency in the department when dealing with foreign banks. So, for instance, a tremendous amount of alerts were being generated from Saudi British Bank, anti-terrorist financing alerts. I mean, very, very serious stuff. So because there was just so many alerts being generated, this counterintelligence FBI trader, he decided to allow those reps at Saudi British Bank to determine whether or not, the Know Your Customer rule was met. So
he's delegating this to the Saudi bank.
That we could go ahead and rely on their knowledge and information, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this went on after they had the cease and desist order. And after you left, you go to the FBI, but nothing essentially happened with this. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the FBI had a 4-hour interview with them, and the Senate hearing started a couple maybe a month or two later. But no, the FBI they did not include my evidence in this case because they know that see, let me take a step back for a second. Then I apologize. But the information that the government had against HSBC before me was very general and very vague. My evidence is very specific. It names names. It has the transactions. It has the people. It has the entities. Everything, and it could literally shut down the bank. So they did not want to include my information, and that's why I'm pressing now for a new investigation into HSBC with my evidence.
So now you've gone to members of Congress, is that correct? And you've also filed a lawsuit?
Well, I do not have a lawsuit, no.
Okay.
What we did was Berger and Montague, which is a very large whistleblowing law firm in Philly. They took me on as a client. I'm not paying them. And they filed a whistleblowing claim, and they filed my evidence with the Department of Justice, with Bernanke, with the SEC, and we are trying to instigate, and there already is an investigation being reopened into HSBC. But I am not personally suing HSBC. No,
Okay.
I'm not. There's no lawsuit there.
Okay, all right, that's fine. So you're just trying to get this investigation open because even though they admitted to wrongdoing between the period of 2004 and 2010, that was, like you said, a very generalized wrongdoing. And you saw that even after 2010, when they had the cease and desist order, you saw that it was still going on. And the terms of the leniency pointed out that they had cooperation from HSBC and that there was remediation efforts at HSBC. And what you're pointing out, and pointed out actually before they came up with this finding, you pointed out that no, actually it's still going on, and you pointed out some specifics, and basically up to this point, really nobody's paid any attention. Is that correct? Have you gotten anybody at Congress to take up your cause?
Yeah, I was contacted by Maxine Waters at the House Finance Committee, and she invited me down to Capitol Hill a couple weeks ago, and I spent 2.5 hours, disclosing all my evidence and information. And, she was in shock. And she said specifically that, my information is so specific and lethal to the bank because this could take them down. Well,
that's under the assumption that they're not too big to fail or not too big to jail. And
from my understanding, Congressman Waters did go to Eric Holder, and Eric Holder was asked, why are you ignoring Everett Stern's evidence? So, I think we're kind of coming to a head with the situation where they're going to have to investigate, and what I'm trying to do on my end is alert the public as to what's going on so they can apply pressure.
I understand.
Because the thing is that these animals down in Newcastle, Delaware, are killing Americans with the click of a mouse, and that's what I think people don't understand, is that this is not a normal banking scandal. I mean, we're talking American soldiers are getting their limbs blown off by IEDs, and then we have a foreign bank sponsoring terrorism on U.S. soil.
And in the war on drugs, we've got over tens of thousands of people in Mexico that have lost their lives over this, as well as 80% of the violence that's going on in Chicago isn't because people have guns or even easy access to guns in Chicago, except for the drug gangs, and they're shooting it out with each other. We have the former Cook County prosecutor, Jim Gierach, telling us that it's prohibition that's responsible for 80% of the drug violence in Chicago and the gun violence in Chicago. It has real-world consequences, this kind of corruption. Thank you very much, Everett, for talking to us. We really appreciate your efforts to get the truth out, to do this at great cost to yourself personally. We always appreciate people standing up for the truth. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex. And we were just talking to Everett Stern, a former employee of HSBC, and he was talking to us about the HSBC money laundering scandal. If you remember back in March, we were told that they were essentially too big to jail. And again, I've got to just read this quote again. This is from Assistant Attorney General Lanny Brewer, who said that if they hadn't just given them a wrist slap, he said the U.S. authorities, if they had pressed criminal charges, would almost certainly have lost the HSBC banking license, and the future of the institution would have been under threat, and the entire banking system would have been destabilized. That was taken as a too big to jail statement. And it was just a week later that we saw UBS get off in the LIBOR scandal. Now, LIBOR, if you have a home loan, you know that in most cases, if you have an adjustable rate mortgage, that LIBOR is the supposedly market-based metric that they use to set the interest rate on adjustable rate mortgages. And UBS was involved in a manipulation scandal that involved trillions with a T, trillions of dollars worth of money. But of course, they didn't want to destroy a major financial institution, so they just gave them a pass and said, no problem. We don't want to really get tough with anybody. Well, the same thing happened with HSB and with Wachovia and with Bank of America, we see this pattern happening over and over again, but Everett Stern saw this happening at HSBC even after the 2010 cease and desist order. He was brought in as part of a new corrected anti-money laundering effort at HSBC, but he saw problems that were very specific, and he documented these, went to the FBI. So far, he's not heard anything as far as prosecutions go. He's talked to Congresswoman Maxine Waters, and she promises that she's going to talk to the Department of Justice and get something done. We'll see. But I definitely respect Everett Stern for taking it on himself to blow the whistle. You know, we need to have honest people in law enforcement, honest people in these private institutions, people like Ed Snowden. When they see something is wrong, they need to point out criminal actions. That's what the society needs. We need to have reform of the corruption that's going on in our governments. And that's not a problem when somebody points out criminal actions. The government thinks it's a problem. They don't want anybody like an Ed Snowden to point out when things are criminal. So they think the problem is just shutting up the Ed Snowdens. We've got to find a way to contain them, to keep them in the dark, or the Everett Sterns. But we appreciate it, Everett, when you come out and you talk about these problems. And you've done this at great personal risk, too. Tell us what happened to your personal life. There's always a price to pay when you do that.
Sure. Well, as you know, I mean, it always gets darker before, before the dawn. But, yeah, I mean, I lost everything. I couldn't get hired. I ended up working as a waiter at P.F. Chang's, and P.F. Chang's hired me because I had no waiting experience, but I had $20 in my bank account, and I took the Rolling Stone, when I was featured in Rolling Stone, I took the magazine down to P.F. Chang, showed him my photo in the magazine, and said, look, I did the right thing. I need a job, and I just need help, and they hired me, and knowing that I wasn't going to be there in a couple of months, moving on to bigger and better things. But they, I have tremendous respect for them and the way they helped me, and working as a waiter just gave me a whole new appreciation of hard work and what it means, the value of a dollar, Yeah. But it's just amazing to me that, as these people who are still working at P.F. Chang's, I'm not there anymore, the waiters are living an honest life. They're not making that much money. But these guys at HSBC are sitting down for a lobster dinner, then getting into their BMW after sponsoring terrorism.
But they respected your integrity, and you would do it again, wouldn't you, Everett?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question. It's a matter of, I live my life with honor, integrity, and loyalty, and it's about service to country and protecting the United States.
Well, we need more people like you, Everett. We're out of time, and that's tacticalrabbit.com. You can find out about him.
Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. He's Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network. And now, live from Austin, Texas, Alex Jones.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex. We were just talking to HSBC whistleblower Everett Stern. And, as you listen to the tough times that he had, and we've heard whistleblowers from the NSA who were kicked out of really high-paying jobs within the federal government, and the security that they had wound up working as Apple geniuses or working in retail, going from that. But these people who have that kind of integrity, they would do it all over again, just like Everett said. And I want you to take a look at his website. It's tacticalrabbit.com. We've had that up on the lower thirds. Basically, what he does is it's an intelligence company that is set up to help defend people against banking fraud and other types of fraud. He's kind of self-taught. He was looking at the situation that was going on. He saw corruption, money laundering there. He was very concerned about it, and he educated himself to detect this. So you can take advantage of his integrity as well as his efforts if you go to that site. Now, an interesting thing has broken up in just the last week or so with Bitcoin. And, as we look at this system that the Department of Justice is working so hard to protect, this corrupt system of fiat currencies and central banks and banks who run money to drug companies, to terrorists, who fund the war on drugs, who fund the war on terror. We want to see something that's a little bit different. We want to see some alternatives there. And a lot of people have been looking closely at Bitcoin, and I'm not recommending Bitcoin. It's got some issues with it. But it's kind of interesting to see this Silk Road site that was taken down in the last week, and there were 600,000 Bitcoins involved in that. It's about $80 million. And the FBI has not been able to get at that. That in and of itself is a bit of a story. It's also a story to see how this is going to develop, how they're going to be treated differently than these banks that are in bed with the federal government. These banks that we believe are running the federal government. Just like the insurance companies wrote Obamacare, we have the banks who are profiting from the war on drugs, banks who are profiting from the war on terror, and banks who are essentially too big to jail, too big to fail. Let's take a look at this latest story about Bitcoin and what might possibly happen with this money laundering case that we've got going here. About a week ago, the FBI arrested the man who allegedly owned Silk Road, an online source of illegal drugs that accepted only Bitcoins. What is most interesting is that the FBI has not yet been able to seize over 600,000 Bitcoins without his password. The FBI can't crack it, or maybe they don't want to crack it. Maybe they want to use it as an excuse to try to shut down Bitcoin. While the war on drugs has been an absolute failure by any metric, the war on property rights and the war on due process has been a resounding success for the feds. We've seen an abuse of civil forfeiture without due process, without people being charged with a crime. In many cases, the people who have their property seized are never charged with a crime. So one of the key reasons to stop prohibition is the ludicrous unconstitutional extremes the government has taken in property seizures. But it isn't just that Bitcoins are hard for the feds to seize. They also offer something the feds hate even more, and that's privacy. Under the Bank Secrecy Act, financial institutions are required to report transactions to the feds and must also, quote, know, in other words, verify, customer identities. In other words, the Bank Secrecy Act means there is no secrecy with banks. But as we've seen with HSBC, when large banks know their customers are drug cartels or terrorists, the feds leave them alone if they're a big bank that supports the central bank fiat money scheme. HSBC was caught laundering money for Sinaloa and Zeta drug cartels. They were caught laundering money for Hamas, Hezbollah, and Al-Qaeda. Yet Assistant Attorney General Lanny Brewer said HSBC would almost certainly have lost its banking license in the U.S. The future of the institution would have been under threat, and the entire banking system would have been destabilized if they hadn't just given them a slap. We're going to be right back, and we're going to finish up this report because it's going to be interesting to see how things develop with Bitcoins. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex Jones. We were just talking in the last hour to a whistleblower from HSBC, talking about money laundering there. We were talking about how so many banks have been caught laundering money to drug organizations, to terrorists, and how no U.S. jail, no U.S. bank has ever gone to jail. They're too big to jail. They're too big to fail. They're too big to jail. And now they're going after, though, Bitcoin. And we've seen a lot of noise, a lot of traffic on mainstream media, especially places like NPR, talking about Bitcoin and comparing them to the Federal Reserve. I was in the car the other day and happened to hit a NPR station, and they said, well, what is the difference between Bitcoin and the Federal Reserve, our regular currency? And they said, well, our regular currency is backed by the full faith and credit of the Federal Reserve. That was their biggest selling point. And it's like, seriously? You know, the organization that can print money at will with they're unelected. It's a private organization that puts us in debt to them, that's had us on an interest-only loan for 100 years. That's that bank. That's a recommendation for that. And of course, Bitcoin is a market-based currency, but there are some restrictions as to it cannot be added to indefinitely. So you can take a look at that, and it's very interesting. But one of the interesting things about it is how it's distributed and how there isn't really any central person that they can go to shut this down. We've had several instances where people have tried to create honest currencies out of commodities, out of gold, out of silver. It happened to a fellow in North Carolina. They just recently shut down Liberty Reserve, jailed the fellow there, Badofsky. They can't do that with Bitcoin very easily. As a matter of fact, when they shut down Silk Road, which was an online seller of illegal drugs, they confiscated 26,000 Bitcoins, and they got to those Bitcoins, but they also got 600,000 Bitcoins that belonged to the person that they allege was running Silk Road, and they have not been able to break that because they don't have his password. So it's kind of interesting to see what's going to develop with this. I mean, will they get it out of him with a rubber hose? Will they beat him until they get the password, or will he give it up as part of a plea bargaining agreement? We don't really know. If they get it, what kind of mischief could they do in the Bitcoin community? I don't know. We had first part of this report just before the break. Let's run the rest of that report.
HSBC was caught laundering money for Sinaloa and Zeta drug cartels. They were caught laundering money for Hamas, Hezbollah, and Al-Qaeda. Yet Assistant Attorney General Lanny Brewer said HSBC would almost certainly have lost its banking license in the U.S. The future of the institution would have been under threat, and the entire banking system would have been destabilized if they hadn't just given them a slap on the wrist, if they had enforced the laws against money laundering. But HSBC was too big to jail because they serve the fiat banking system and they partner with the feds in running drugs and in arming terrorists. The feds hate Bitcoin because it serves as an alternative to their banking system and their control. They would love to destabilize it, but that's not going to be easy. If the government tries to shut down Bitcoin like they did Liberty Reserve, they're going to have a problem. There is no single person for them to move against like Budofsky at Liberty Reserve. Bitcoins are both anonymous and decentralized, so it'll be very difficult for the feds to try to shut it down. If they do, they will drive it underground. But if they can get a hold of the 600,000 Bitcoins, which are 5% of the outstanding total of Bitcoins at the time, they could try to destabilize it. Good luck with that. It will be very transparent if they try. For Infowars Nightly News, I'm David Knight.
Well, that's a report we ran last night on the Infowars Nightly News. You can see our reports on Prison Planet TV. As a matter of fact, you can see the interview that Alex had with Tosh Plumlee, who is a whistleblower about Benghazi, and he's been on 3 times with Alex. You can see those interviews. Eventually, they're going to run his interview, they've said, on Fox News. They've said on that for quite a while. Everett Stern had an interview with NBC's, let's see, who was it? I'm not sure who it was, but it was with NBC, and they've been setting on that interview. So perhaps they'll get interested in some of the corruption that's going on, alleged corruption that's going on at HSBC. We'll see if that report airs. But we also have some news about something that you may not have heard about, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, we have some breaking news here that says the U.S. trade official says that they're going to seek a Trans-Pacific Partnership deal by the end of the year. They've been working on this for 3 years now. They've had talks. They've had the 19th round of talks was at the end of August. It's involving 12 nations. It's aimed at establishing a free trade bloc that would stretch from Vietnam to Chile to Japan, encompassing 800 million people, about a third of the world trade, nearly 40% of the global economy. Now, Alex Jones has talked about this. He covered this back in Endgame, the documentary. He talked about how they were going to set up multiple trading blocks, regional trading blocks, and then start to merge those together. That's what we're seeing here with this Trans-Pacific Partnership. There's also a Transatlantic Free Trade Agreement, TAFTA, very much like NAFTA. It's a very disturbing development because what we're seeing here is just as the Bilderberg Conference has their meetings in secret where they plan long-term strategies and they don't allow anybody to see that, we see the same thing happening here, but they're actually working on immediate tactics to pull this together. They're not allowing any press to be there. This is a very secretive meeting between some trade reps and between corporate lobbyists, hundreds of corporate lobbyists. And yet elected officials from governments are not allowed to attend. A lot of people have been pushing back on that. Ron Wyden pushed back on that here in the U.S. He complained about it long and loudly, and they finally allowed him to come, but not any of his staff who would be experienced in looking at trade agreements. They also did not allow him to take anything away or to be able to look at anything on his computer, although all of these lobbyists are allowed to have a password and to look at this trade agreement that's being put together. This is this report from Business and Financial News said that this is more intrusive than other trade pacts. The TPP seeks to regulate sensitive areas like government procurement, intellectual property, and the role of state-owned enterprises, as well as giving corporations more rights to sue governments. So that's exactly what's happening. They're changing the basic fundamental legal structure of our country, just the way they did with FISA, the secretive intelligence court that nobody knew about until the Ed Snowden leaks. FISA and this is an investor state tribunals that they're setting up. We've seen this already with NAFTA. We've already seen taxpayers in these arbitration schemes, taxpayers put on the hook for over $3 billion, and there's another $14 billion that is being adjudicated right now, according to these investor state tribunals. Essentially what it does is it elevates these corporations, these multinational corporations, because it's not local businesses, it's not mom and pop stores, it's not corporations that are wholly contained within a country, it's only the multinational companies, and they get elevated to the same status level as a state. And if the state proposes or passes laws that change the investors' expectations, they can sue that state and they can make the taxpayers pay. But as I pointed out here, this is far beyond a trade pact, because this is a backdoor way to do things like CISPA. You know, CISPA, SOPA, ACTA, those were all going after our personal data, also taking away due process for anybody that has a website on the internet. They were going after that in the name of copyright infringement, because you see these large multinational corporations want to own everything and turn you into renters. When they did this with the World Bank over a couple of decades under Robert McNamara, they were routinely criticized for seeking renter status from the developing countries. They were multiplying their debt, just like we see happening in the United States now. Over the last couple of years of McNamara's reign at the World Bank, some of these Latin American countries were seeing their debts increase by 20% a year. Basically, they were trying to get them so far into debt that they were essentially like renters, that they could never get out. Does that sound familiar to what's going on in the United States now? We've got a $17 trillion debt ceiling, and of course that has to be raised. Harry Reid is looking to raise that by another trillion. That's about 5 or 6% more. He wants to keep going further and further into debt. But they're also going to be using this to circumvent laws against privacy violations. They're also going to use this as a secret way to put in CISPA, SOPA, and ACTA. So we've got groups who are defending electronic privacy, electronic freedom, that are opposed to this. They're also going to use this to try to do an end around countries that have put in regulations requiring honest labeling on food to help people to understand if there's GMO in that or not. And of course, the Monsanto and other large corporations here have been successful in lobbying to stop that at the state level. They're lobbying to try to stop that at the national level. And of course, this TPP would stop it at an international level. So it's not just the United States that would be getting food that had GMO in it that we couldn't know about what was in the food. It would be hidden from many other nations. So there's other countries and other people who are involved in this. And there's a way that we can all come together on this. So that's the only good news about this, is if people wake up and see what's happening. There are people in different strata of society, people who would sometimes be aligned on the left side of an issue or sometimes on the right side of an issue, that would come together and oppose this, because it really is world governance by the corporations. It's not just moving jobs over shore. Of course, that is a part of it as well, but it's also blocking any kind of future financial regulations from these banks that we see are too big to fail, too big to jail. It would prevent anything like the Glass-Steagall Act to be reenacted. It's a comprehensive way to give the corporations, the large multinational corporations, whatever they want, to elevate them to the status of states. We have to stop the TPP agreement. We'll be right back. In the last break, we were talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, and the way that's going to impact us, the way it's going to be a backdoor to get CISPA, ACTA, those types of attacks on our First Amendment rights, on our internet privacy, our internet freedom rights, as well as a way to allow the government to immediately shut down any website that they allege to be in copyright violation without due process, without a trial. They just basically pull the plug immediately for the corporations. And so they work together with the corporations. The corporations get to assert ownership over everything in the world, and the banks get control over everything in the world. One of the things that's going to be in this Trans-Pacific Partnership that has leaked out, according to consumer groups, this is being reported by a site, USA Hitman, they say that the TPP could mean criminal penalties for even small-scale unauthorized downloading. It could result in a 3 strikes law that would see households kicked off the internet for copyright violations. Get that? Kicked off of the internet. You get 3 downloads that they say are unauthorized and you're kicked off. And it could mean expanded copyright and patent terms that would mean lessened access to generic drugs. So the pharmaceuticals hate generic drugs. So that's one of the things that's in the TPP for sure. As far as the three strikes goes, we'll have to wait and see. It's something that is being negotiated in secret. It's something that they've given fast-track authorization to our trade representative, which means that it doesn't go through the normal channels of a treaty. It's simply negotiated with this trade rep, and then it's simply a majority vote in the House and the Senate to get this thing through, and then Katie, bar the doors. The corporations have become governments at that point. Now, in a related matter, we've got a report on Prison Planet from David Seaman. He pointed out that the man heading up the congressional NSA reform package is the one who authored CISPA. That would be Mike Rogers. You think they're really going to reform the NSA? Remember that Mike Rogers, besides putting in CISPA, back in July, the end of July, he said that Justin Amash's efforts to curb the NSA powers were dangerous. So he came out criticizing real reform of the NSA at that time. But then, of course, he comes back, and because he's kind of the puppet for the Department of Homeland Security, he's head of the House Intelligence Committee. Mike Rogers, Republican from Michigan, is now constructing a NSA reform bill. And this just broke today. Senator Ron Wyden says that he will fight the ineffective NSA reform. Of course, he correctly understands that this is nothing but window dressing. It's not going to do anything. As a matter of fact, probably coming from Mike Rogers, the NSA Reform Act would probably give them more powers. We'll have to wait and see what it actually says. But the Hill reports that Senator Ron Wyden has promised to fight against intelligence committees in Congress that are aiming to introduce what he calls, quote, skin-deep reform. He is, of course, talking about the NSA reform proposals being spearheaded by, get this, Dianne Feinstein and House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Rogers. There you go. Feinstein and Rogers, a pair that you can trust. You know, Feinstein, this is somebody who, of course, is always going after the Second Amendment, and is Feinstein, if you remember, that was talking about licensing people as journalists. You know, if you've got a blog, you are not protected. Unless you're somebody that she considers to be a journalist, you're not protected. So, as we had said before, the people who are coming after the Second Amendment are going to be coming after the First Amendment. We've seen that with Dianne Feinstein, and now, of course, Dianne Feinstein is going to give us a head fake for the NSA reform. She was also a part, if you remember, the NDAA bill, when they were getting that put together last year, at the end of the year. It was Feinstein who co-authored an amendment that was supposedly going to control the NDAA, indefinite detention without trial, and transporting people to be tortured out of the country. She supposedly had something in there that was going to control that. We looked at it, and actually it was pretty meaningless wording. But even that, which they used to get unanimous passage in the Senate, even that was just arbitrarily thrown out by Senator McCain. And so the NDAA has not changed. Now, the truckers who are in Washington this week, they are on top of the Constitution. They're actually teaming up with people who are complaining about the NDAA. They have a call campaign to repeal the NDAA with these truckers who are doing a Restore the Constitution rally in Washington tomorrow. And we'll see what happens with that. We hope that that's going to have an effect, but it's important for everybody. You know, it's people on both the left and the right are waking up and seeing that the division is no longer between Republicans or Democrats, just as we see Ron Wyden pointing out that it's he's opposing both the TPP as well as the NSA. He's pointing out, he's going after secret government. And that's what we all need to be concerned about. We need to be concerned about how they are fundamentally transforming the legal structure, destroying a legal structure that took centuries to build. We're going to be right back with Andrew. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex, and I've got in the studio with me Anthony Gucciardi from StoryLeak, and he's got an interesting story to go over with us. 3 disturbing Fukushima facts that the government is covering up. Tell us about that, Anthony.
So it's funny that we don't trust the NSA. You know, we go over there and try to give them a little bit of a check and balance. They throw us out and say we're crazy.
Yeah.
Why should we trust the government when it comes to a radiological explosion event like the mega disaster of Fukushima? I mean, they say it's safe. They say it's perfectly great. Everything's fine. Everything's happy. The Japanese officials have been caught time and time again admitting on record they lied about the levels. They downplayed it. They ignored it.
Well, their meters didn't even go up to the max. They weren't even capable of recording what the radiation was. We find out now that it's like 18 times higher than they said. Well, that's tremendous.
They turned the counters off.
Yeah.
They don't want you to know. And my whole thing is, this thing is bigger than we even thought. And it's coming out more and more because even I thought, you know, even researching this, that 2011, 2012, that's where the massive amount of radiation was coming from. You know, we're dealing with those effects. Potentially they're going to try and take the rods out and make it explode again sometime soon, maybe this month or the next. But it's even worse than I thought. In September, last September, it was found that the radiation levels were skyrocketing and spiking to highest amounts on record.
Yeah, this is going on now for well over 2 years.
Yeah.
And it just keeps going and going and going. This is a story that just, they still don't have this under control. It's still right on a razor's edge.
Yeah, so let's be clear. It did not peak in 2011, 2012. It's getting worse.
Yes.
And they don't even know how to deal with it. They accidentally turned off the power. I mean, this is such a mismanagement on a scale that makes me think it's not even possible to handle it so improperly. It's unbelievable what's going on. Let's look back specifically as well as to what happened with all the radioactive cesium and everything like that. Most people think it just kind of went into the air and disappeared, or maybe a little bit went into the ocean. 20%, according to independent research, TEPCO later had to admit this, 20% went on Japanese land and started killing people there. 2% went on foreign lands just from this initial release. 78%, according to this independent research, was just massively funneled into the Pacific Ocean. And that's why you have fish with 258 times the quote-unquote safe allowable levels of radiation coming in, and people are eating it, and they don't even know.
And they just had another release of more radiation. Of course, they said, oh, don't worry about it. It's low level. But then they kind of rolled that story back and said, well, there was, for a couple hours, it was really high, but then we got that down. So it just keeps going and going because they've got these massive tanks that have highly radioactive water that is from the original disaster. And they see that that's leaking down into the ground. So they're going to build this incredibly expensive ice wall to try to contain that because it's leaked down into the groundwater there.
It sounds like a cartoon idea.
Yeah.
It's just Looney Tunes.
Yeah.
And then you look, even Huffington Post now, an article, it's a good article called Fukushima Forever, basically says it's just going to leak forever into the ocean. And what are we going to do about it? And people are told from the news that regurgitates the government diarrhea of information that nothing's wrong. Everything's fine. You know, it's conspiracy now, even though Facebook in Japan is blowing up with all these people getting radiation sickness, and we could talk about that, the nosebleeds. They're not only saying that's crazy and you're a conspiracy theorist if you talk about it, but they're saying that those people are literally insane.
Yeah, that's the story that we have on Infowars from Natural News. Japanese doctors ordered to cover up mass radiation sickness across the population. That's the nosebleeds that they see happening now. People are complaining about that on Facebook, and the government's response is, move along, there's nothing to see here. This is something, though, that doesn't just affect people in Japan. It's also people in the U.S., of course, that have some exposure to this because it's polluting the ocean, the fish, as well as the prevailing westerly winds. When Chernobyl happened, you had a tremendous amount of exposure to people in Western Europe because of prevailing westerlies. We're going to see the same sort of thing happening here if there's a major disaster when they try to take these nuclear fuel rods out.
Well, we're already seeing it here because they found hot particles as far as Boston. San Francisco, the soil samples, they found particles as well. So it's already happening, and just one of those particles, talk to any of the experts. You inhale one of those particles, it's bad news. It's pretty much game over. The cancer might come later at a later point, but just one of those hot particles is horrible, and we're seeing them come across as far as Boston. I mean, for the people that are saying that the Fukushima disaster has nothing to do with the United States, they're deluding themselves. It's a complete insanity that they're saying that. And that's why I'm writing articles like this. We're talking about this to get this out, because the establishment will just brick wall it every single time because it's such a big, hot issue. If people actually knew about it, we would freak out, and rightfully so. So that's why they ignore it and downplay it. And then the media, you know what the media does with things like the NSA or the TSA, they take what the government says and they spin it even more. Well, imagine the government saying that Fukushima is great and amazing. The media spins it further and then says it's a conspiracy theorist to even say radiation is bad, pretty much.
Right.
There was figures saying that radiation is good.
Yeah, and Coulter, yeah.
Yeah, Low-level radiation is great when, in fact, low-level can actually harm you more than a lot because of the way the body works. Just a little bit of something can, in some ways, like a microchip, kind of destroy everything as opposed to a large amount.
But you can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't taste it. You don't see an immediate effect. This is something that, as you pointed out, is a long-term reaction. It's an increase in the number of cancers, and they can come back and say, well, gee, we don't really know where that came from.
And there was a
5 years, 10 years. Yeah, exactly. So this is something that the government doesn't want to alarm people about, and they don't really care. They're not going to look out for our health. We certainly know that. We can see that from the way they allow GMO and other things into our food supply that we also know have long-term subtle side effects. But this really is tremendous. The spent reactor fuel that's there is 85 times the radioactivity that was released at Chernobyl. So we have a lot of potential exposure to that. And as you were pointing out before, they're going to do something now with the fuel rods. They're actually going to try to get these down.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to do a precise surgical operation that some of the experts say is over a 90% chance is going to fail. And what that could mean is another explosion at Fukushima. You know, even though there's been countless already, we don't even know the true number. It could be another one coming in the very near future. And
they're going to try to pull these things out, and they're possibly bent or damaged because there's been this earthquake there.
Of course, yeah.
So they've got to pull these things out without touching each other. There's like over 1,000 of them there.
The same people that accidentally turn the power off.
Yeah.
You know, the same people that want to build an ice wall around the plant instead of actually addressing the issue. And, of course, the same people that said, actually, yeah, the radiation emitted from the initial explosion was not that much. And then they were continuing to lie until an independent review came, an independent scientific review, and said it was not only 2.5 times more radiation initially, but that, of course, they were dumping it in the Pacific Ocean on purpose. And then TEPCO came and said, yeah, we were going to tell you about that. You know, our readings were a little bit off, but somehow independent scientists on a low budget managed to find the exact readings and exactly where the cesium and radioactive material was going. So TEPCO is a bunch of liars, and they want to...
It's a large corporation.
Of course.
That's looking out for their corporate profits.
It's like this. It's if Monsanto owned a nuclear power plant. That's how much we can trust these people.
Right. That's right. Very much like that. Yeah, the former head of the NRC, is Dr. Yakso, has said that continuing to put a Band-Aid on a Band-Aid is not going to fix the problem of Fukushima. And he's pointed out that the nuclear power plants here in the U.S. essentially share the same design flaw. And GE and other companies who made this reactor have gone through, and they've had the Japanese government, the Canadian government sign these essentially waivers, releasing them from any liability for this. But he's pointed out that they all have this fundamental design flaw that you've got to keep these cooling power sources continuously going no matter what happens, whether it's a terrorist attack or whether it's an earthquake or a flood or a tornado or a hurricane. Those backup power plants have to keep going and keep it cooling because these spent fuel reactors, these spent fuel pools are just as dangerous as the reactor. So just as we saw with 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, we saw reactors that blew up. Now the public is starting to realize that the spent fuel is just as dangerous, and it's going to be there for thousands of years as well.
That's exactly right. And when I talk to these nuclear experts, what amazes me the most is what they say off air, what they tell me in emails, basically that the whole system is beyond fixable almost. I mean, it is. There's ways to do it right with nuclear power. There are, but they're not doing it right. That's why 3 out of 4, or up to 90% of every single nuclear power plant in the United States right now is leaking. Every single one. And Obama wants to put dozens more on the East Coast.
Oh, yeah, that's his favorite source of power is nuclear. He thinks that's the greenest thing out there.
They're not just putting Band-Aids on things. They're just making the problem worse. They're making more Fukushimas. They're not even trying to bandage it.
It's just amazing to me that they can portray carbon dioxide, which every animal, every human breathes out, and that plants use just like we use oxygen. They can portray that as the most dangerous thing on Earth. And yet, when you look at the most dangerous thing on Earth, these highly radioactive spent fuel pools and these nuclear reactors, they tell us just the opposite. They tell us that's the greenest thing on Earth.
No, you don't understand. CO2 is evil.
Yeah.
Sustainable clean coal is evil. But actual radiation and nuclear energy from power plants that are leaking 90% across the United States and Fukushima and Chernobyl, that's all really good, and radiation doesn't hurt you.
Yeah.
But CO2 will kill you.
It reminds me, they had this story, When the Wind Blows, and they made it into an animated story back in Britain. It was a British animated film back in the 80s. And it was this couple who was kind of fuddy-duddy, and there was a nuclear accident or nuclear war. Anyway, there was a lot of nuclear fallout headed toward them, and they just innocently read the government pamphlets about what they were to do. And it was just total baloney. It was like sticking your head in the desk with a duck and cover exercises, when there's incoming nuclear missiles, don't worry, duck and cover, stick your head in the desk. It's the same sort of thing. And that's what we're getting with these nuclear reactor issues.
Let's put the puzzle pieces together right now here on air. They're not telling you about how to even prepare yourself. They're not telling you about even the basics of iodine or anything. They're telling you nothing. They're saying everything's great. We're turning the counters off. We're raising the allowable safe limits, which we're not safe anyway, in the food. We're just not going to tell you about anything. Compare that to what else they're doing in these agencies. Compare that to what they're doing with Obamacare. Burning and radiating people all day long. That's safe too. Radiation is great, but it's more than that. It's with the NSA, the TSA, the DEA, the DHS. All of these organizations are in this same structure. If they're not telling you about Fukushima and the radiation that's killing you and your family, what else are they not telling you about? It's a simple connect the dots. Big Pharma is killing you. They're patenting a bunch of natural substances, adding a bunch of toxins, and then the side effects are on average about 280, sometimes 560, including sudden death. They're making money off it. They know. I've had a biotechnology official, I've actually talked about it here on the Alex Jones Show, live exclusively, email me in a confirmed email and say it's awesome that GMOs and other things like that are killing people because the world needs to depopulate, and he hates people. He's glad to see people dying. This is the exact kind of thing we're seeing now run rampant in government, and the Monsanto executives are getting promoted. The TEPCO guys are getting pats on the back when the radiation amounts would kill people in a few hours if they were anywhere near the plant unprotected. I mean, that's what we're seeing. This is the government. This is the establishment right now. It's not an isolated incident. And if people realize that, then I think we can win.
Hopefully with this shutdown that's going on, and what I like to call the Obama scare part, where he's going out of his way to shut people out of the monuments. And these are monuments that were monuments not to government. They were monuments to the World War II soldiers. And yet he's taking it as if it's his own personal monuments, and just the absolute contempt that he has for the public. And you just see this pervasively. Talking about the slow kill that's going on with Big Pharma, the slow kill that's going on with these nuclear power plants. And yet their answer is to just double down and more of the same, like you said, making
more of the same,
building more Fukushimas. Yakso, the former NRC chair, said that we need to shut down every one of our nuclear reactors because they all have that same design flaw that we see at Fukushima.
Yeah, exactly. Let me tell you a story as well. When we were on the way to the NSA data center in Utah to cover it and kind of give a check and balance on them, just as I'm doing with Fukushima right now, and they don't like that.
That's a great story.
I was on the plane, and I got a little piece of a napkin, and it said, support the fight against breast cancer, and I had a little pamphlet about radiation and chemotherapy treatment. And on the loudspeaker, they said, "This flight is sponsored by cancer.org. Everyone should go to cancer.org and donate as much as you can to help breast cancer sufferers," and everything. And they had all these booklets. I saved a bunch of them. I want to do a report on it. And it just shows the cheap and slimy, pervasive element of this government promoting radiation therapy, chemotherapy, and ignoring real studies. Turmeric and items like that, ginger. There's a research, the piece of research that shows 80% decline in cancer cells with the use of some of these herbs. But they don't tell you about that. They don't tell you about any of that. It's insanity at the core, and it shows this is pervasive throughout all entire agencies of government, just in bed with corporations.
And as Alex has pointed out many times, they don't want you to look at the causes of cancer either. It's not just that they don't want you to look at safe and effective natural remedies that boost your immune system. They don't want you to see the causes of cancer, the GMO or the nuclear radiation that they're releasing. So they never really look at, they're all about treatment, because there's a lot of money to be made in cancer treatment. But they're not about cancer investigation or natural remedies.
The industry loves Fukushima. It's skyrocketing cancer cases. I mean, there was a piece of research done. It was heavily attacked immediately by everyone in the AMA. Within about an hour of its release, that said about 10,000 to 100,000 people have already died from Fukushima radiation. Now, that was attacked immediately just for them saying that, not even just saying that 100,000 people died. That wasn't even attacked at first. It was just saying that radiation can do that. They didn't even believe that. I mean, radiation now is a good thing. I mean, I guess we should bottle radiation and take it for overall health enhancement. I guess the cancer organization of the government, the United States government and Japan, should get together and they should fund Fukushima pills. and we should take them to enhance our overall immunity.
They can bottle it. Maybe they can do what the nuclear industry and the aluminum industry did here. You know, they dump their toxic waste, their fluoride, into our water system. So maybe that's the solution for Fukushima. They just take those highly radioactive storage tanks that are leaking, and they're trying to contain them with a $500 million ice wall. Maybe they should just dump that in the drinking water like they do fluoride here. You know, nobody would taste it.
It's in the Pacific Ocean.
That's right. That's right. At least we probably wouldn't have a taste, unlike fluoride, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's the reality as well, is that the big issue here is that you can't see this radiation. You can't see the effects of Fukushima. Things you can see, things like people not getting into World War II monuments or not getting into the national parks. And that shows, by the way, the government thinks it owns every single thing in the whole world that's owned by us. But
we didn't build it. They built it.
Obama built it with his bare hands.
He won the war, not the World War II veteran.
World War II and built the monument, and it's his. But that's visible. That is a visible threat. Or, for example, if you go to the store and there's not food there you want, then people will be mad or whatever. A police shutdown in Boston, martial law style. Those are visible things that are kind of easy to win against and kind of easy to fight against, and the mainstream media will pick it up because they have to, because we force them to, the real authentic media, and people will look at it and they'll get the ad revenue and everything, even though sometimes they don't cover the essential items. But the problem with Fukushima, and I do know that most of the listeners are aware of this, but the fact is the general public is not, because it's an invisible threat. If radiation was a big green monster, it would be a big deal. But you go through your average day and you don't know what's happening. You get cancer 5-10 years later and you don't know why. And then you go to the doctor and he said it's a genetic thing. It has nothing to do with your lifestyle, nothing to do with Fukushima radiation, nothing. It's all safe.
Yeah, we've heard that over and over again. Well, thanks. And you got something else to talk to us about right after the break. We're going to continue to talk about Fukushima and the developments, and you haven't even gotten into your 3 disturbing facts about Fukushima that the government's covering up. So we're going to go into that in detail right after the break with Anthony Gucciardi from StoryLeak. Stay tuned. Back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex Jones, and there is a train coming. And we were just talking about Fukushima. You may think that it's old news, but it's the story, even though it happened over 2 years ago, there's still new developments in that. And we were just talking to Anthony Gucciardi from StoryLeak about new developments at Fukushima. Tell us a little bit more about what's going on there, Anthony.
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head. People think that Fukushima is an ancient, old story that happened and the radiation went and now it's gone. But the reality is, just as early as September 4th, 2013, as I just wrote in this article now up on Infowars.com, the radiation levels of Fukushima spiked. The highest, skyrocketed just about a month ago. So this event is not over. In fact, it's getting worse.
Very precarious. We've got a damaged reactor that's been kind of teetering now for over 2 years, and that's not getting any better because all the things that were dangerous about it are still there, but getting older.
And this TEPCO company, they have workers that have a history of accidentally turning the power off, just destroying everything, using tape to fill in holes. They're going to go in and try and surgically attack one of these rods and try and stabilize it a little bit. And some of the experts I talked to said there's a 96% chance they will fail. And I don't want them to fail. I don't want that to happen. I wish, Fukushima would resolve itself magically, but that's not going to happen. And that's why we have to hit this on the head over and over and over again, because the government is covering this up 101. I mean, this is the very basics.
And as you were saying in the previous segment, we've already had, as far away as Boston, we've seen evidence of wind-borne radiation that's coming in. So if they have another explosive event trying to remove these rods, that's going to have massive consequences for the United States, which is prevailing westerlies are going to bring it to us. First, it's going to go over the Pacific Ocean, contaminate fish, contaminate food. Then it's headed for the United States, and not just the West Coast, as you point out, Boston as well.
According to the doctors I talked to, in the event of another explosion, which looks like it may happen if they go in, if they're foolish enough to go in and tamper with these rods again, not only will the workers, unfortunately, most likely die, but you'll have about a month to prepare yourself. About 1 month after that happens, you better get yourself prepared. And we know now that the plant operators have been caught on record faking the readings of the radiation levels. They've been caught dumping it into the Pacific Ocean. They've been time and time again caught saying that, it's over, it's fine, it's better now when the radiation levels are hitting new highs. This is something that if we don't force into the media, if we don't force into the radar of the general public, we'll just be like this cancerous tumor on the body of the planet. We're not even talking about just the United States right now. I mean, this will obliterate the planet with radiation if it ultimately does explode, and they're crazy enough to do this.
Absolutely. And that's just one of the nuclear power plants. All right, so you've got Natural Society, which is the third largest natural health site. What would you recommend that we do to prepare for it?
Okay, so one of the things that I've always had a challenge with is finding something to prepare myself for pretty much any disaster. And when I started Natural Society, it's because I recovered from Lyme disease naturally, and no one believed me, and I wanted to write about it. And thankfully, yeah, we get millions of visitors now. My also other website, StoryLeak.com, is doing well too. But what it came down to is I met Dr. Edward Group, who's been on this show before and did an excellent job. It was an amazing interview. And we determined that to prepare ourselves, we wanted to create a form of iodine. But we looked. There was different forms of iodine in the market. They contained GMOs, artificial sweeteners similar to aspartame, artificial preservatives, and even worse. I mean, it's to the point now where some of the bottles would dissolve the glass droppers within a month. They just destroy it, so it has to be stable. We came up with a nascent iodine form, talked to Alex. He tested it out thoroughly because he was on a mission to find as well the best, absolute best form for him and his family, and then he wanted to give it to his kids too, which was essential. Came up with Infowars Life Survival Shield Nascent Iodine. Perhaps we can talk about it specifically, but it is the best form, non-GMO, vegan, kosher. It's the only one I take, the only one Alex takes, period.
And we just got, when we introduced that, it immediately flew off the shelves. We didn't have any more
supply left.
We've got a new supply in now, right?
It's coming in, yes.
Yeah.
So I would recommend everyone get this, prepare yourself in the event of a disaster.
Well, that's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 11 Central, 12 Eastern.